Respectfully yours, PGT Beauregard, Brigadier General, Confederate States of America Army, West Point, class of 1838. 56-year-old Robert Anderson needed no introduction to the Creole who had been named Superintendent of the U.S. Military Academy on January 1st, 1861. He had held the post only a few days before being dismissed for outspoken Southern views. Earlier, Beauregard had been Anderson's artillery instructor. As commander of the Illinois Volunteers during the Black Hawk Indian War, Anderson had briefly in his service a raw recruit named Abraham Lincoln. Kentucky-born Anderson, married to the former Eliza Clinch of Georgia and one-time slave owner himself, had been sent to Fort Moultrie in Charleston Harbor because he was viewed as unlikely to antagonize Southerners. From Moultrie, he had moved his men without authorization to stronger and larger Fort Sumter, which was entirely surrounded by water. From Sumter, he regretfully responded to the invitation to surrender peaceably. That invitation, he wrote, constituted a demand with which I regret that my sense of honor and my obligations to my government prevent my compliance. Delivering his memorandum to Beauregard's emissaries, the West Point graduate of the class of 1825 remarked to the rebel messengers, "Gentlemen, if you do not batter us to pieces, we shall be starved out in a few days." By early April 1861, virtually all federal installations in the South had been seized. Forts, arsenals, custom houses, and even lighthouses. Only 4 remained under direct control of Washington authorities: Fort Pickens off Pensacola Bay, Fort Taylor at Key West, Fort Jefferson in the Dry Tortugas, and Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor. Sumter was of little military significance until Anderson abandoned Moultrie to Confederates and took over the larger base in the dead of night. Sumter had had no permanent garrison. If, as many believed, the North-South schism would be healed only in battle, Sumter would play an insignificant role at best. But the grim little bastion perched on a tiny island was the most important federal installation in the South, not yet seized by military forces of seceded states. All 3 Florida bases combined were less significant than was Sumter. Secession had begun in Charleston less than 4 months before Beauregard invited Anderson to surrender the installation. Loss of Sumter would do immense psychological damage to the Washington government. Like Uncle Tom, Dred Scott, and John Brown, Fort Sumter was a symbol that could serve to rally thousands to fight for a cause. CSA President Jefferson Davis, who had graduated from West Point in the class of 1828, 3 years after Anderson, had not yet transferred his government to Richmond. In Montgomery, Alabama, he read a telegram reporting that Anderson refused to give up Fort Sumter. From South Carolina Governor Francis W. Pickens, he had learned that high officials in Washington had promised to give up Sumter. Days later, though, the same persons regretfully informed the governor that a naval relief expedition was underway. Beauregard was instructed from Montgomery to demand from Anderson a specific time of surrender. If no such time was indicated, he was told to reduce the fort with big guns that had already ringed much of Charleston Harbor. It was already April 12, 1861. A few minutes offered to evacuate at noon on the 15th, barring receipt of controlling instructions from my government or additional supplies. Following Beauregard's instructions, aides regretfully told Anderson that his terms were unacceptable. Relief ships, they knew, were already close to Charleston. Our batteries will open fire in 1 hour, they told the federal commander before climbing back into their white-flagged boat for a return to the shore. Anderson carefully noted the time, 3:20 a.m. Before taking leave of the messengers, he had shaken the hand of each man. If we do not meet again in this world, he told them, I hope we may meet in a better one. Roger Pryor of Virginia who headed the band of messengers, ordered his tiny vessel toward Cummings Point. There he gave the order to fire without reporting to Beauregard. Gunners offered him the honor of touching off the first shot. He shook his head and refused with obvious deep emotion. Close by was Edmund Ruffin, age 67, editor of a farm paper and a long-time hard-line secessionist. Standing very close to the Richmond Greys at the execution of John Brown, Ruffin had chatted with an inspiring actor in the ranks, congratulating him on having taken part in the capture of Brown. The older man said to John Wilkes Booth, My hair may be white, but my blood is red. I am ready to spill it for the South. When Roger Pryor refused the honor of firing the first shot at Fort Sumter, Edmund Ruffin eagerly asked for the privilege. At 4:30 he pulled a lanyard and a tracer shell arched across the sky, illuminating the pentagonal structure that Anderson had refused to yield. Howitzers and mortars, at least 47 in number, were fired leisurely during hours of darkness, but began a furious bombardment as dawn approached. Anderson held his fire until dawn, then gave Captain Abner Doubleday the honor of firing the first shot at heavily fortified Charleston. Ladies and gentlemen of the city gathered on rooftops and other observation points to watch the show. At first they cheered every Confederate move, even applauding the arrival of Beauregard's Spanish barber and valet. As the day wore on and spectators grew hoarse, the rate of fire became even faster. Although Anderson had 40 big guns, he was short of ammunition, and so he ordered his men to aim precisely and to fire leisurely. The supply ships expected by the federal commander arrived on the afternoon of the 12th, but were kept out of the harbor by Confederate gunners. By the time the ships were visible, Anderson had nearly exhausted his supply of powder bag cartridges. A band of civilians who were employed at the base sewed furiously, making bags from burlap, scraps of linen, and even from socks. Even so, the effective federal fire was reduced to 6 guns. Beauregard began using hot shot in late afternoon. As a result, Sumter's defenders had to extinguish at least 3 separate fires by nightfall. Confederates shelled only periodically throughout the night, and Federal guns were silent. At dawn on the 13th, Beauregard's men resumed their furious pace that had marked the heat of the previous day's exchange. Sumter's casemates were so filled with smoke that cannoneers held wet handkerchiefs over their faces and crawled along the ground to their stations. A Confederate ship shell ripped the U.S. flag from its staff. A sergeant hastily nailed it back in place, and Anderson's men continued to fire an occasional information. Anderson stalled but did not refuse outright. At 12:48 p.m., the flag was again shot from its staff. Anderson managed to signal to the shore that he was ready to give up. Beauregard immediately sent officials to accept the surrender. During the 34-hour artillery duel, Confederates had launched more than 4,000 shells. Federal guns had fired infrequently but had managed to take off part of the roof of the Moultrie Hotel. Several soldiers had been wounded, as had a few civilians, but not a person had died. While Charlestonians staged a glorious celebration, Confederate soldiers prepared to hoist South Carolina's Palmetto flag over the captured installation. Anderson, who had been promised the privilege of a final salute to his own flag, insisted upon giving it. At first he planned to fire 100 guns, but was forced to settle for just 50. Wind carried a burning ember to a stack of cartridges during the final salute to the U.S. flag. A great explosion injured 5 men and killed gunner Daniel Hoff, the first casualty of the war that was now 3 days old. Jubilant Southerners danced in the streets of the cities. Louis Wigfall taunted the North, "Your flag has been insulted. Redress it if you dare." In 8 states where sentiment was divided, leaders begged for action, appropriate to events that have taken place at Fort Sumter. Eventually, 4 more states joined the CSA: Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas. Maryland, Delaware, Kentucky, and Missouri voted to remain in the Union. All 8 had both Unionist and secessionist parties that created wide and lasting division internally. Word of the fall of Sumter reached Washington on Sunday, only an hour or 2 after Daniel Hoff had died. Newspaper editors hurriedly opened their offices to write their stories. Abraham Lincoln called his cabinet together in emergency session, demanded and got assent to a presidential proclamation calling on states to provide 75,000 militia for 90 days of service against combinations too powerful to be suppressed by ordinary judicial proceedings. It was not a declaration of war. Only Congress could make a declaration, and lawmakers were not in session. But the military draft was issued on Monday, April 15th, with quotas assigned to each state and territory except the 7 that had already seceded. His voice trembling, staunch abolitionist Horace Greeley of New York solemnly informed employees of his newspaper and Northerners in